Hello and welcome to another edition of Ideological. I am your host, Zach Lee, and I hope that you are doing great. Today is a very special day. Today is Aristotle Day. Today we're going to talk about a figure whose influence is so enormous that you could really just have a podcast just on different elements of his thought. Like there could be an entire podcast, not just like one episode, but like every week they just come out with a different aspect of his thought. He's that much of a genius. And so today we're talking about Aristotle, and we can't cover everything in one lesson of such an enormous figure, but we're going to do our best, and we're going to have fun, mainly talking about his metaphysics, ethics, and some of his political views. But I first want to start out by talking about how this guy's a big deal, okay? The Beatles are a big deal, right? And, Michael Jordan's a big deal. Aristotle makes them all look like hated children. His influence is absolutely enormous. We're talking about the guy that's in the top one or two greatest philosophers of all time. Okay, there's debate on this. Some people think it's Plato. Usually they say Plato's number one, Aristotle's number two. There's a famous quote by Alfred North Whitehead where he says, "All of Western philosophy is but footnotes to Plato." But others have argued that actually Aristotle's influence might be bigger than Plato's, because though Plato had a huge influence and even was the teacher of Aristotle, Aristotle's biology, science, the way he influenced the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages and all that kind of stuff, he might have a bigger influence, especially with people today. Most of us are more naturally Aristotelian than we are Platonic. And so anyway, Aristotle, big freaking deal. He is the forerunner of all the science and biology we have today. He basically invented logic. Now, let me be clear. You can't invent logic. Logic is math. Logic is there before Aristotle. What I mean is he's really the first one that we know of to have a full-fledged system of logic. Other people had written on elements of it, at least in his own. Let me say it this way. He might not be the only person the first person to have a full-fledged system of logic. He thinks, and his influence is so enormous that he is kind of considered to be. That's a better way to say it. There are other people that wrote about logical things before, but he's kind of considered to be the original systematizer of a system of logic. His system of logic will be used the most throughout world history. It won't change until a couple of guys, Bull and Frege are their last names, will change some elements of logic, but Aristotle's logic will be kind of the standard for a long time. He actually writes in the Sophistical Refutations, talking about logic, he said, "When it comes to this subject, it is not the case that part had been worked out in advance and part had not. Instead, nothing existed at all." So he thinks he's kind of a big deal logically. He is a big deal logically. His influence on Judaism, on Islam, on Christianity would be enormous. These religious systems would all use Aristotle to kind of systematize their theology. In Judaism, he influenced Moses Maimonides. In Islam, he influenced Avicenna and Averroes. Thomas Aquinas, who's, again, a big deal. Thomas Aquinas is probably the second most influential theologian in Roman Catholicism after Augustine, maybe third overall. And so he simply calls Aristotle the philosopher. Like when you're reading his Summa Theologiae, he just says things like, "the philosopher says," and he just means Aristotle, because Aristotle is the philosopher. Aristotle's influence is felt in poetry, politics, rhetoric, science, logic, philosophy, theology, psychology, and education. His works were not accessible to most of Europe for hundreds of years, though. A few works have been translated early, but it didn't really hit Europe until about the 12th century. Arabic writers had actually used him earlier, and so he was more widely known in the kind of the Islamic world before it became really popular to read him in universities in Europe. So anyway, Aristotle's, whether you love him or hate him, his influence is enormous. I'm very aroused right now. Aristotle, he's doing great. Let's talk about his life. He was born in 384. By the way, sometimes people wonder what I'm doing with this. I'm looking at my notes. I like looking at you right into your soul. I like zooming in and saying something deep, but I also have to look at my notes. He was born in 384 BCE, and it's pronounced in Greek Stagira, which is a place in northern Greece. In 367, he moved to Athens, where he attended Plato's academy for 20 years. So I don't know how long you went to college, but to study with Plato and his disciples and walk around peripatetic style and learn about philosophy from the greatest, philosophy and philosophy city at the time is incredible. In 343, he was invited to tutor Alexander the Great. Look at this lineage. Socrates, so you've got Socrates and his link to teaching Plato. We don't have anything actually written by Socrates himself. We have things about him from Plato. Plato uses him as a mouthpiece, but you got Socrates, and then his student Plato, and then Plato's student Aristotle, and then Aristotle's student is Alexander the Great, who, by the way, conquered the known world in his 20s. I don't know what you were doing in your 20s, probably getting drunk and playing Xbox, but Alexander the Great was conquering the known world. That's quite a lineage. He's not called Alexander the Pretty Good. Aristotle is doing some big things. In 335, he returns to Athens and shortly thereafter sets up his rival school, the Lyceum. He's often shown, if you look at pictures of Aristotle, it's not like we have photographs, but if you Google it, he's often shown in like a bust with a beard. That's because a beard was seen as like a mark of an intelligent philosopher. Let's just let that set for a second. Bearded men make better philosophers. However, he probably did not actually have a beard. Diogenes Laertius said that he was shaved. He was one of the few major philosophers to be married. Most famous philosophers in Western history were bachelors. He is an unashamed elitist, okay? So let me just say this. He would certainly be canceled in our day. He defended slavery. He thought Greeks were smarter and better than foreigners, the barbarians. He thought women were incomplete men. And he also thought people who were more talented and virtuous should have more honors and rewards. So he is not egalitarian. He is elitist. He thinks some people are better than other people by nature and by training when it comes to things like virtuous living. He died in 322, and when he did, he had a large estate, 2 teenage kids, and a common-law wife because his previous wife had died. Okay, that's our boy Aristotle. Let's talk about his works. Looking at Aristotle's works is trickier than other ancient authors. Let me tell you why. One, when we have ancient list of his works, we don't have some of those today. So we're like, where are these works? There's also things that we have in our list today that ancient writers might not have. Additionally, and this is the biggest, so we don't have Aristotle's full corpus. This is the biggest thing, though. Most of what we have from Aristotle has at some point kind of been put together and edited. We don't have, so for example, if you read Moby Richard, I don't want to offend anyone, by Herman Melville, which I think is one of the greatest works of fiction of all time, that is a sustained story from beginning to end. Or even if you read philosophical works, take Descartes' Meditations. He has a purpose for why he's writing that, and he writes it, and it all goes together and it all makes sense, whether you agree or disagree. From Aristotle, though, we primarily have almost like his students' classroom notes. They're things that are kind of thrown together, so they're very difficult to read. Sometimes they're not super systematic. There are several places where there are just, in my view, straight up contradictions. Some people think that you can harmonize it, but I think that there's just some contradictions because in most of these works, he was teaching, writing, whatever, and at some point they're put together, but you don't have the same kind of linear, just, hi, I'm Aristotle, and I just want to write this treatise only on every topic. I mean, we have some areas of his works, you're like, this is a sustained argument, and this is great, and it can go on for a while. Some works even seem a lot more linear and sustained than others, but a lot of what we have is kind of put together piecemeal. So just keep that in mind. He's difficult to read anyway. His language is difficult, and we're kind of a fly on the wall for some teaching moments. And so let me give you his most enduring works. This is not the full list. These are the ones, though, that if you want to get into Aristotle, these would be great places to start. Categories: De Interpretatione, or On Interpretation; Prior Analytics; Posterior Analytics; Topics; Sophistical Refutations; Physics. Physics is a great place to start. It's actually very metaphysical, despite the fact that it's called physics. Metaphysics, which is a different work, also dealing with metaphysics. De Anima, that is his view of his work on the soul. That'll be very popular in the Middle Ages as well as a defense of the soul. History of Animals. Why did I include that one? Because you need to understand that Aristotle is a top-rate biologist, and that's a good work if you kind of want to understand how he thinks of Aristotle's just as comfortable studying like the mating habits of frogs as he is talking about being, okay? The Nicomachean Ethics would be his primary ethical work. The Eudemian Ethics, there's a lot of crossover between those two. Politics, rhetoric, and poetics. I like how I made a mistake saying the word rhetoric. It's ironical, as I've heard people say. So this is Aristotle. His influence is enormous. We can't go over everything in his thought. I just can't emphasize to you what a big deal this guy is. Whether you love him or hate him, after Aristotle, people are just going to have to deal with his thought. There is no doing theology. You have to have a system that undergirds that theology. What is theology? It's whatever your religious tradition teaches plus a way of systematizing it so it doesn't contradict. And Aristotle becomes the guy in the Middle Ages later, though. Most of the Middle Ages is not aware of what's going on with most of Aristotle's writings. But the same thing in Islam, the same thing in Judaism, they are all having to deal with this guy. But not just that. I mean, other guys later on will appeal back to his views of teleology, back to his views of purpose. Teleology being that everything has a purpose. Things go a certain way for a reason. His view of the world will also be extremely powerful and popular. He believed that the universe was eternal. A lot of philosophers believe that. He very much had a view of the world and the universe and how things function that would be strongly challenged by like Galileo and these kind of guys later to say, no, Aristotle's not right. Aristotle's physics is kind of the primary view of the physical world, really until someone like Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton is such an influential figure, not just because apples fall on his head, but because in a sense, his physical system is replacing Aristotle. Now, again, there's other guys that had come before Newton. Anytime I say something in a 30-minute podcast, I can't give all the qualifiers. And people think if I don't give all the qualifiers, I don't know it or should have said it or whatever. I can't give all the qualifiers, so give me grace. Anyway, so he is people. Some people hate him. They fight against him. But he is the guy. All right. He is the yeah. So let's talk about his metaphysics. Metaphysics is actually just a term for his works that came after physics that was later given there. These meta means after in Greek, and physis is physics. So it's really just the lectures after physics. But what metaphysics means specifically to Aristotle, and he says this in his Metaphysics, is that he's trying to study being qua being. What does that mean? That means being insofar as it is being. So he's trying to study being itself, not just individual beings. A pencil, Zach, something like this. This is a pen, by the way. I said pencil. It's also purple because I'm fancy. He's trying to study being itself, being qua being. And for Aristotle, there's different categories of being. So let's do something less boring. What I want you to do is wherever you're listening to this or watching this, I want you to look around the room and I want you to name some objects in the room, okay? You might say things like there are books, there's your phone, there's a computer, there's your hand, there's a water bottle. You might name individual objects. So go ahead and for a second, just name some things in the room. I'll wait. Okay, do you have your list? You name some things? You most likely name the things that I just named, these individual physical objects. If you're a little more trying to trick me, you might say things like, Zach, there's not just a book in the room, there's words on the pages. And if you're especially bright, you might say crazy things like there's light and air in the room. Great. Here's what you probably didn't name. Sitting is in the room. Notice that I'm sitting. There's an action in the room. Time is in the room. Besideness, check this out. Here's a coaster and here's a pen, and the pen is now beside the coaster. You probably didn't name things like numbers. How many numbers are in this room? An infinite number? Whatever it might be. So my point is there's all redness is in the room. We didn't just name a straight up color. We probably said there was a red book, but just redness itself. There's a lot of different kinds of beings that are in the room. Why did you primarily focus on individual objects? And the answer is because you have been influenced by Aristotle, whether you've read him or not. Again, his influence is that big. So he divides being into different kinds of beings. I'll name them. This is his list of 10. And sometimes he's a little more reserved on when he gives a list and what he includes, but here's his list of 10. Substance, quantity, quality, relatives or relation, somewhere or place, sometime or time, being in a position or just what people call position, having or being in a state, sometimes people just say state, acting or action, and then being acted upon or what's called passion. Passion for ancient writers usually means being affected by something. If they talk about the passions, the idea is that you're kind of this passive victim and they just hit you and they change you. But anyway, of those 10 categories though, which one for Aristotle is the most important, the primary way of being? And it is substance, okay? Let's do some nerd things. The easiest way to understand Aristotle's view of metaphysics is to contrast him with his teacher Plato, okay? Now again, that's not Play-Doh, the clay that you smush through that little thing and make the weird spaghetti noodles that look super gross. Plato with a T. This is going to be just a crass simplification of Plato. How do we know what's beautiful down here on earth? How do we know what's justice down here on earth? How do we know these kind of things? For Plato, the answer is there is an eternal world above us. The world is two-tiered. There's the world down here, the shadows, where things are instantiated, and there's individual things like, hamburgers and trees and hippopotamuses. And there's all these kind of things down here. But they're not the most real things. They're just like a shadow. The most real things are up in the heavens. They're what he calls the forms. What is a form for Plato? It's a standard definition of something. It's the standard of goodness, and then individual things down here have that to a degree. Or it's the standard of beauty or the standard of justice, or how do we know what a triangle is down here? Because there's a perfect triangle in the forms. And everything down here instantiates that, like yield signs or like pieces of pizza. And then we have triangles. That's Plato's view. It is very top down. You have these standard forms, these standard definitions of things in the heavens that our souls have seen. He thinks are back in eternity. He thinks humans didn't just start existing when their parents had sex. And then we come down here and we compare things down here, the shadows, to the forms. Anyway, that's Plato. We need a whole lecture on Plato. We don't have time for it today. But that's his view. Now, I'm going to simplify it with an analogy that Plato would have hated, because he likes talking about big concepts like goodness, the good. And I'm going to use a man-made artifact, which he would hate. But I'm going to do this because I think it's helpful. If you have a table with 4 legs, is that a table? You'd probably say, sure. You might be sitting at a table with 4 legs right now. If I take away one of the legs, is that still a table? You'll say, yeah, I think you can have a 3-legged table. Perfect. You and I are in agreement. I don't think that's a word. It might be. Let's say we only have 2 legs now on the table and we lean it against a wall. Is that a table? Sure. Now let's say, though, that we take off all the legs and then it's just a piece of wood on the ground. Is it a table now? Most of you would probably say no. It's just a piece of wood. Not all pieces of wood are tables. A piece of particle board at a construction site is not a table. How did you know that? How did you know what a table was? And then how did you know when it was no longer a table? Well, maybe you say, Zach, maybe it's its function that makes it a table. It's something that holds up food. Well, no, a military briefing room table doesn't hold up food, and it's a table. Or when you eat food, sitting down on your lap, that doesn't mean your lap or your plate is a table. So it's not just the function of it. How did you know what a table was? And then how did you know when it changed? Or if I say, am I Zach if I lose my hair? You'll say yes. And I'll say, am I Zach if I were to be vaporized or somehow actually became a woman? You'd be like, maybe not. How did you know what Zach was? Well, again, Plato would not use this for just me as Zach or as a table. I'm using this as an example to teach you because it's easier. But imagine for a second that up in the heavens, there's a standard definition of table that's already imprinted on your mind. That's how you knew what a table was when I said, could you have a 2-legged table? And you thought, yeah, there's a definition of a table and 2 legs fits. But then when we took all the legs off the table, you said no. Again, he would do bigger things like goodness, but you get the point. That is Plato. Aristotle's is the opposite. Okay, now let me be clear. I'm not saying that and a lot of people misunderstand this. Aristotle is not saying that justice and beauty do not exist. All he's saying is that they exist insofar as some substances are just or beautiful. So whereas Plato's top-down, Aristotle is bottom-up. For Aristotle, the form of a horse is in a horse. It is the individual things. What we do is we look at a horse and we look at a horse and we look at a horse and we get this kind of category of what a horse is. And so it's not just that there's a form of horseness and the horses down here partake in that horseness. It's rather that the horseness is in the individual horse, or goodness or beauty or justice is in individual substances that are just or good or beautiful. So whereas Plato is having this 2-tiered structure of reality, Aristotle kind of has 1 tier. I look at a horse, and that individual horse obviously has horseness. I look at something individually that's beautiful, let's say a sunset or a flower, and that thing has beauty, but it has it not detached from the substance. Okay, that's huge for understanding Aristotle. Anyway, easiest way to think of it is this famous painting of, we might even throw it on the screen, of Plato and Aristotle, where Plato is pointing up at the sky and Aristotle has his hand stretched out, and Plato's talking about the forms up in the heavens, and Aristotle's saying, no, things down here. Let's look at individual things. Let's look at individual substances, etc. Now, I keep saying substance. What does Aristotle mean by substance? A substance for Aristotle, so if Plato's primarily talking about forms. Aristotle's primarily talking about substance. A substance for Aristotle, though, is not a stuff. Don't think of how we think of substance today as we think of like atoms or water or, if I say, what is that substance made of? You're like, the cake? It's made of like bread or flour. We think of it as a stuff. That's not what he means by substance. Substance for Aristotle means something like the primary way of existing. And here's what's frustrating about Aristotle. He's sometimes inconsistent on his definition of substance. Okay? Sometimes substance is individuated. So Zach, me, the person Zach is a substance, but the category of man is not. But sometimes substance is definable and not individuated. So sometimes man is a substance, but Zach is not. So let me give you some places where he kind of contradicts himself. The primary meaning of substance, and by the way, if you have to say, okay, I'm going to oversimplify, what does Aristotle mean by substance? This is the best definition. This comes from categories, his work Categories. Substance, strictly so-called, primarily and par excellence, is that which is neither said of subject nor is in a subject, e.g. such and such a man, such and such a horse. Second substances are the species and genera to which the primary substances belong. Thus, such and such a man belongs to the species human, and the genus of his species is animal. So both human and animal are called second substances. What he's trying to say is there's a sense in which mankind, or horsekind, are a secondary substance. The primary way to think of substances, though, is an individual object. For Aristotle, the primary way to view substance is individual, middle-sized objects. So I, Zach, am a substance. This water bottle is a substance, okay? That's a substance. Not just me, human, not just humanity, but Zach is a substance. That's his primary way. But there are other places where he talks about these categories of substance and even these more eternal kind of substances when he talks about like the unmoved movers of the universe. I'll give you a quote from his Metaphysics. Hence, the first heavens must be eternal. There is therefore something which moves them. And since what both moves and is moved has an intermediate status, there must be a mover which moves them without being moved, eternal and a substance and actual. What does he mean by that? Aristotle's Theology. He thinks that the stories of the gods, like Zeus, Greek mythology, you need those for dumb people. You need those for the vulgar to help them understand. They're not as smart as philosophers. But really, those are just dumb. There's obviously not these kind of anthropomorphic gods. Rather, what stands behind those gods are these like eternal principles of the universe. And in a sense, those things are a type of substance par excellence. So he's a little bit inconsistent. Summary. What does all this mean? Again, I find this stuff so fascinating. And some of you are like, yes, talk to me more dirty theology. And other people are like, why am I not listening to a podcast that is just wiener jokes? That would be so much more fun. I just need to throw more of those in here. For Aristotle, individual middle-sized objects, regular things we encounter throughout our day, the tree, the hydrangea, the person, like the specific person, Bob, your friend, those are substances. Okay, let's talk about his ethics real quick. I have a whole lecture that that's already been recorded on different ethical systems, and Aristotle's virtue ethics is one of those. But just to summarize, because I don't want to repeat that entire lesson, whereas most systems of ethics, and you primarily get this in Eudemian ethics and then Nicomachean ethics, again, and there's a lot of crossover between those two works. Whereas most systems of ethics try to create a list. It's almost casuistry, like a list of just right and wrong ethical things. Murder equals bad, helping someone equals good. Adultery equals bad, helping someone. Aristotle is not as interested in playing that game. He will go through certain virtues and he will list certain virtues and vices in these works. And so he's not avoiding it altogether, but he doesn't give you a comprehensive list. What he tries to do instead is he tries to make you understand that the goal of an ethical or virtuous life is to become an excellent person. This is why sometimes this is called aretaic ethics, right? After the Greek word arete, which means excellence. By that, what he means is human flourishing. Maximizing your potential, being what a human is made to be. A human, if they are truly flourishing and truly being virtuous, will seek after a life of rational contemplation, which leads to virtuous action as they submit themselves to virtues and discipline themselves to be virtuous. This will lead to not only happiness in life. Aristotle thinks, one, if you don't have all the virtues, you don't have any of them, because they all are going to go together and you have to know how to use them. But also he thinks that if you're not virtuous, you cannot be happy. Again, listen to the ethics lecture. I talk more about that. I don't want to repeat all that stuff here. But what he's trying to do is Virtue ethics for Aristotle is that somebody chooses to act virtuously over time, which causes them to become a virtuous person who naturally does what is right, who acts from the right motivations, under a life of rational contemplation, who maximizes their virtuous human potential. That's his view of ethics. So he's trying to get you to be an excellent human, which he thinks means being virtuous. That's what will make you happy. That's what humans are made to do. They're made to embrace the different things a human is supposed to do at that time in life unimpeded. Okay, that's a great way to say it. To live a successful life, for Aristotle, to have pleasure is doing standard activity that humans are supposed to do unimpeded, supposed to enjoy unimpeded. That's the goal of life for Aristotle. That makes you a virtuous person. So then when the issue comes up, you know what to do. So instead of having to create a list of 1,000 do's or don'ts, also known as 1,000, become the kind of virtuous person that when this situation arises, you know what you should do without having to have the list. Become the kind of person that can see virtue by being virtuous. And then you don't need a list so much because you've already practiced these other things that are obviously virtuous. Okay? An interesting point here, by the way, you have to have independence to truly be excellent for Aristotle. So if you have to work a vocation, which most of us do, you're cutting yourself short of your highest potential. You can't truly be an excellent human if you have to devote so much of your day to pursuing a vocation. That's not as great as having the time for politics and study and leisure and helping others and whatever it might be. Okay. Within Aristotle, there is something that scholars often call the golden mean. What that means is there are some things that are just straight up bad. Adultery. Okay. A lot of things, though, in life, it's a balance between two extremes. You don't want too much one way or too much of the other. And so many virtues are this mean, this medium, this in-between of two extremes. So I'll give you just a few as I run through this. Again, listen to the ethics lecture. I mean, it's by yours truly, so you know it's going to be just fire. Courage. If you're a coward, you're obviously not courageous. So cowardice is on one end of the spectrum. That's not good. Here's cowardice. It's bad. We hate you, cowardice. But on the other end of the spectrum, there is brashness, where you just run out on the battlefield and commit suicide. You're just like, I'm just going to run out there and get killed. I won't even be successful. That's not courage either. Courage is having the right amount of fear and overcoming it when the time calls for it. That's the mean. That's the golden mean. I just hit my mic when I did that, which is awesome. The golden mean. That's what that is. Okay. Or wittiness. You don't want to be the person that's the clown, that's always telling the joke that nobody takes seriously, but you also don't want to be the person who's boorish, who can't make a joke. You have to be witty. In this sense, Aristotle would say, wow, Zach, in the Ideological podcast, how witty, how virtuous you are. This includes even other things like anger. There's a right time to get angry. You can be too angry. That's a vice. You can also let everyone walk all over you, and that's a vice. Sexual pleasure. There's a right and appropriate way to pursue sexual pleasure. And then there's somebody who never pursues it, that everyone would think is kind of weird, and a person who pursues it way too much, who everybody thinks is a perv. And so there's this middle ground, this golden mean. So a lot of what Aristotle does in describing these different virtues is to try to use common sense to try to figure out where is the appropriate demarcation between two extremes. And then lastly, and again, I mentioned this in the other lecture more, a big thing for Aristotle is that you have to practice virtue when you're not virtuous, or you'll never learn it. You're not going to wake up one day and not be anxious. You're going to have to practice all day not thinking anxious thoughts and practicing bravery. You're not going to wake up one day and not be lustful. You're going to have to practice not giving in to your passions. You're not going to wake up one day and be witty. You're going to have to practice being witty. You're going to have to be around witty people. You're going to have to read books on wit and humor and these kind of things. In the same way that you won't be a great baseball player by just hoping you will, you have to practice. In the same way that you won't be a great flute player by just hoping you will, you have to practice. For every area in your life where you want to change, where you want to be a better person, where you want to be more successful, maybe it's courage you want to grow in, maybe it's intelligence you want to grow in, whatever it is, you're going to have to practice it while you're bad at it. The person playing the flute is bad at it and sounds terrible and everyone wants to kill them. But they have to practice while they're bad or they'll never get good. The same is true with personal traits and virtues. The same is true. You're going to have to practice these things while you're bad at it. And then you do it for however many years and you started to overcome some of your vices. So take that to be helpful as you will. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about politics. Aristotle thinks that a truly aspirational human life should play itself out in politics. Well, why, Zach? Because for Aristotle, remember, The virtuous life, the best life, the most pleasurable life is one of rational contemplation. That's what the gods do, even though he says elsewhere that the gods are just kind of symbols for these celestial, eternal things, these unmoved movers. Again, not entirely consistent. But the gods, they just sit around and think. They don't need anything. And so, yes, there is a life of rational contemplation, but that should play itself out in virtue. It should play itself out in action. You have to know how to apply the wisdom that you have. And it's not just pure contemplation. And one of the ways to play this out that is so essential for human flourishing is in politics. Because in politics, what you do is you take your rational contemplation, you take your virtue, and you play it out for the good of others. You play it out to help people. Humans are political animals. That's the way Aristotle views it. And so we like functioning in community. We like functioning in society. And so we need to develop these virtues so that we can have virtuous societies and so we can influence the state and the people around us. Now, again, Aristotle's going to hold some things that are offensive for modern standards. Like I said, he is pro-slavery. He does not. I hear people quote Aristotle like in defense of democracy, which, by the way, in a second we'll learn that he doesn't defend democracy. But his democracy is not like what we have today. He thought certain people should have certain rights and others would not. He is pro-slavery. He actually thinks that some people are slaves by nature. So by nature, people are not equal. Okay. There's a joke about this. What is it? I'm trying to remember. I didn't write it in my notes. It's some sort of joke about God being a capitalist because he doesn't create people equally. Meaning some people are smarter, some people are more handsome, some people are more talented, some people are stronger. So even if everyone's life has equal human value, that doesn't mean everybody is equal in every area. Some people are more virtuous, some people are smarter, some people are whatever. And so in Aristotle's thinking, some people by nature are made to be slaves, and they'd be happier that way because they can't really lead themselves. Okay, now again, don't think, this is also offensive today. I'm not supporting Aristotle here. I'm just saying what his view is. Don't think 1800 slavery in America, okay? Think of the kind of slavery going on in his day, which is still bad. I'm not defending it. But his view is that some people are happier being led who don't have all these talents and skills and virtues and education, whereas other people are naturally made to lead. Not saying I agree with him, just telling you what Aristotle thinks, okay? Don't shoot the messenger. He is also pro-private property. He does think that certain people who are more talented should have more and better things, higher honors, higher rewards, etc. Now, let's talk briefly about his politics. Again, his main work in this is Politics, if you want to read that. But I want to contrast it with Plato. For Plato, his view of an ideal state is very weird, by the way. First of all, it's led by philosopher kings. So these people that have to be trained academically their entire lives, they have to learn and focus on the forms, be kept away from bad stories of talking about the gods' vices and these kind of things. They have to become these philosopher kings, and they will be the best leaders for society. So number one is a philosopher king for him. That's who should rule society, the person that's the wisest. And then people should have all things in common, including wives and kids. He's kind of a proto-Marxist and all these kind of things. Everything is shared, and you have guardians over the city and blah, blah, blah. You can read The Republic. It's a fantastic book. His view of politics is very strange, though. But for Plato, if you were to rate the different governmental systems, number one and the best one is the philosopher king. Right after that is a timocracy, which usually means property owners, but here it's for Plato, it has the idea of like someone who rules with virtue and honor and military virtue. So philosopher kings, timocracy, and oligarchy, which mainly means a small group that often means rule by the wealthy, the property owners. Number 4 on his list is democracy. He only has 5. He thinks the last one is the worst, tyranny. That's 5th, but one step above tyranny. The worst form he thinks is democracy. Why does Plato think democracy is terrible? Because it's ruled by the uneducated, poor masses for Plato. What he thinks is the masses are primarily going to vote in ways that are best for them. When you're hungry, when you're poor, when you're uneducated, you're going to vote in a way that benefits you, but that could be done at the detriment of society as a whole, or it could be done at the detriment of the minority. Do you really want the majority being able to overrule the rights of some type of minority just because there's more of them? This is kind of the tyranny of the majority is sometimes what it's called. So he thinks democracy is a terrible form of government. For Aristotle is more nuanced. The main thing Aristotle's trying to do is this. He's trying to say, a good democracy will do what is best for the people, do what is best for the state, not just for those in power. So good types of, I might have said democracy, I meant to say governmental systems. Good types of governmental systems do what's best for everyone. Bad types of governmental systems do what's best just for the leaders. And these can play itself out in different ways. So the view that Aristotle probably most would lean towards, at least practically, is what he calls a polity. That's a mixed form of oligarchy and democracy. What that means is where you have kind of this combination of these elites and the people who rule for everyone's best. That's his ideas. So the power's spread out, but the decisions are made for what's best for everyone, not just for those in power. Let me say this as strongly as I can. Aristotle would have hated modern identity politics. Identity politics is where you associate with some group and you view the entire political landscape just through what that group wants. So if it's race, you only care about issues related to the race that you're supporting. Or if it's LGBTQ, you only support issues related to LGBTQ. Or on the religious side, you might only view things through some type of religious lens. It's where you just do what's best for your group instead of what's best for everybody. Okay? And that is something that he would hate because he thinks decisions should be made rationally for everyone's best, not just one special interest group over another. Now, when polity gets degraded, it becomes democracy. Okay, this is why Aristotle also doesn't like democracy. Democracy means everyone ruling for their own interest instead of what's best for everyone in the state. Okay, another form that you can have, and again, Aristotle's more flexible here than Plato on what types of governments would work, maybe in different places and times. You have aristocracy. This is the next best form. That's ruled by those who are virtuously best, not virtually, virtuously the best. This small group does what's best for the state and for everyone. Again, that's the good form, aristocracy. Its degraded form is oligarchy, where the small group makes decisions that are just best for them and not what's best for everyone and the people. So you sometimes see this with politicians today that use that position to leverage and benefit themselves at the expense of other people. And then the third type would be monarchy, which is one ruler. And again, as long as that monarch, he's not against aristocracy or monarchy. If a monarch is an excellent person and he does what is truly best for the people, not just what's best for him, that could be a good type of government, but it denigrates, or its degraded form is tyranny. And so Aristotle doesn't think there's very many people that are so virtuous that they won't bend that power when all the power is focused on one person. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, that they won't do that, have that power and just use it mainly for their good. So to be clear, Aristotle's fine with monarchies, fine with aristocracy if the right people are in office. But because people are so easy to corrupt, he wants to find a balance of a few and a many doing what's best for everybody, and that is polity. Okay. We didn't even get into all his biology. We didn't get into, his psychology. We didn't get into his poetry. We didn't get into his rhetoric. Yeah, so there's so much more that could be said, but this is a good start, an introduction to Aristotle, this enormous thinker who is just so again, love him or hate him. Certain groups hate him. Feminists hate him because of what he says about women, etc. Other people think he is the most brilliant man who ever lives. So he has haters and lovers. Or do we call them lovers? That sounds romantic. Anyway, but that is Aristotle. So thanks for tuning in. Ideological, you're welcome.